Developed by Warp and released in 1999 for the Sega Dreamcast, D2 was always a game I was interested in. Being a survival horror game created by one of the most unorthodox artists in Kenji Eno, it immediately seemed like the kind of game that would be perfect for people looking for something strange and unique. However, this usually means it is not good for wide appeal. Being released on the Dreamcast, a console which sold poorly, didn't help for the legacy of this game, with it never releasing in Europe or receiving any modern ports. In the year 2000, D2 was released in North America. Though it was still stuck on a dead console in the Dreamcast, at least the game was finally translated into English. And when there's a will to play a game, there's a way. Immediately starting the game, you're introduced to the logo made out of baked bean sauce, D2. You play as Laura, who has just awoken from a dream, a premonition of a meteorite striking the Earth. Hope this isn't foreshadowing for something terrible about to happen. She is immediately terrorized from all angles by a child and a man trying to flirt with her. Laura is living in hell. Elsewhere on the plane, an old man is praying to Shadow the Hedgehog. But he's okay, we'll leave him alone.
The final destroyer. Shadow the final destroyer. Shadow the final destroyer.
Suddenly, two guys show up with guns. How did they manage to get guns on the plane? Cult powers? Oh no, even this random guy has a gun too. So, as everything goes down, the premonition does come true. A meteorite strikes the plane as Laura is kidnapped by the random guy. You wake up in a cozy wooden shack, contrasting the hectic nature of the flight. A fire is crackling and being tended to by a woman, Kimberly. She found you near the wreckage of the plane. Somehow Laura managed to survive the plane crash and 8 days in the snow. This piece is rudely interrupted by one of the attackers on the plane, who then morphs into an alien, a very obvious The Thing inspiration with the body horror plus the cold surrounding. Before he gets the chance to kill Kimberly, you're saved by some guy with a Yeti hat. He tells you about the concept of blooming, how people become these creatures. He also explains how you can spot aliens because of their green blood, then contradicts himself by saying regular humans could also have green blood, so not to kill someone just because of the colour of their blood, then dips and goes home. Did I mention that you were found by Kimberly with the girl who terrorised you on the plane? Jeannie? The problem is she's now run off and gone missing. Great parenting, Kimberly. So now the exposition dump is over and you have your first mission, which is to find Jeannie. You move with typical tank controls, synonymous with survival horror games. Forward moves you forward, while the left and right button change the direction of the character. However, the big twist on the survival genre formula is with the combat. Random encounters are triggered when walking around the snow as crazy creatures similar to the guy who attacked you in the hut pop out from the snow. Luckily, you picked up an Uzi back in the lodge, so here we go blasting! The Uzi has unlimited ammo, another plus for the game. However, you come across other weapons which have limited ammo. As you can see, these fights are in first-person view, similar to on-rails shooters like House of the Dead, one of my favourite series. So this is a pretty good combination, and I actually started to look forward to these random encounters, unlike in usual JRPG games. Talking of JRPGs, there is also a level system, with the player gaining experience after a fight. This is not a particularly deep system, with the only noticeable change on the level up being the amount of HP your player has. Another comparison with JRPGs is the main character Laura and her inability to speak at all. In the first building you come across, you find a cassette player and a broken wand, plus a box locked with an e-card reader. Exploring inside buildings is in first-person view. You move around like in an adventure game with limited movements, only able to search predetermined spots. Returning to Kimberly, she plays a song she wrote. This is the part of the game where I first started to realise just how uncanny the whole experience is. Kimberly's breathy voice, spilling the contents of her brain onto the player over this lo-fi guitar track. Her mouth movements not matching the words, while Laura just sits quietly and blankly.
Must have been the end of another sad day when I wrote this poem. I saw this place. It was pure white, as far as the eye could see. And I was counting roses.
Kimberly is a poet, and she talks about her feelings a lot, trauma dumping to Laura within minutes of her waking up. Then away you go on your little quest. I should probably mention the hunting mechanic present in this game. You can shoot rabbits, birds, and moose to get their meat. You can then directly eat the meat, healing the player. This entire mechanic makes the game pretty easy. You take a lot of damage from fights, but there is an abundance of healing items if you try and kill most of the animals you naturally come across. You eventually find the wreckage of the plane while looking for Jeannie. She isn't here, but what is here is the stewardess, who has also become a monster. This is the first boss fight, acting similarly to the usual encounters. After Laura manages to survive being mashed across the side of the plane, Kimberly rescues you in the nick of time. And with her is a sweet snowmobile.
There's a butterfly. I wonder if that's a symbol of that stewardess's wish to fly.
Upon hearing about how cool Kimberly's new ride is, Laura faints and has a flashback of the voice of some guy who was with her after the plane crash. We also see a vision of the Shadow the Hedgehog guy walking across the snow, the Old Man quest. Laura wakes up and off she sets on her quest again, causing mass property damage to progress. She gets caught by the guy who must own the place, so in response Laura decides to shoot him in cold blood. Luckily this guy had just bloomed, making this murder entirely justified. In all seriousness, I like this side of Laura. By her third encounter with a person who has bloomed, she went from someone cowering in fear to someone who is forced to fight to finally someone who isn't afraid to take action to defend herself. This person has on him a keycard and a picture. Oh god, you killed Jeannie's grandfather. Once again you faint and wake up in the cabin with Kimberly. She once again trauma dumps and talks about the drugs she takes to cope with her depressing life. You know, fun and cheery stuff. She also remembers the name of the man who was with you after the plane crash. David, the same guy who was flirting with you on the plane. God, I hope that freak's dead. You return to the first building and use the keycard. You find a shotgun, a passcode, and a walkie-talkie. On the other end is Jeannie, who's asking for her grandfather. Gulp. But at least now you know where she is. Suddenly you hear two people approaching the building. You hide under the bed just in time. A man and what sounds like Kimberly. She's threatening him, forcing this man to tell her about Shadow the Hedgehog's plan to take over the world. The man takes this interest in his work as an invitation to hit on her. In response to the advances, Kimberly eats him. Girl boss moment. Kimberly is probably the most interesting character so far. Not particularly difficult compared to a protagonist who doesn't speak, and a guy who just shows up and leaves immediately. She's going through a lot mentally, but clearly has enough willpower to keep fighting, and this new twist that she might have bloomed makes every scene with her feel more tense. But moving forward and making your way back to Jeannie's location, you use the code and travel down the mines. Down here everything is in first person with identical walls set out like a maze. Exiting fights is pretty disorientating since you have no idea what direction you are facing at the start of the battle. This place also has my favourite enemy design. All of the enemies are pretty well designed, but this guy reminds me a lot of the Marines from Doom. Eventually you find Jeannie, something I instantly regretted when she started talking.
Laura! I was looking for Grandpa and I fell down. There isn't much room down here and it's scary. Help me, Laura!
Luckily for us, we took the broken wand, else we probably wouldn't have been able to reach her. Suddenly, the cave crumbles on you. In response to this, you have a vision where the Great Mother is talking to you. You then pass through a golden door and find footage of some dinosaurs. You wake up, once again back in the shack, safe and sound. It turns out you fell from the sky into safety. Strange. Kimberly wonders what you are and asks if you're a witch. You break the unfortunate news to Jeannie about her grandfather, but luckily for you, she has two mothers to comfort her. Cue epic snowmobile ride as you leave the shack and the first area behind. As you explore the mansion, which happens to be on a cliff edge, Kimberly is ambushed by a guy with a gun and a big boo-boo on his head. Clearly it was done pretty recently too, from the way he moves and talks. Kimberly is also wearing a towel for some reason. Laura is discovered and tied down next to Kimberly. This sets up a scene pretty similar to The Thing. Both captives are in chairs wrapped with rope, while a man with a gun decides if those two are not human. It turns out his suspicion was right as Kimberly blooms. Just before she can get to you, you're saved by Kimberly? You kill the monster for good. Turns out that it was just a copy of some kind, probably taken from the DNA taken of Kimberly during their first encounter with a monster. Kimberly herself was never actually infected. There goes that tension from the earlier scene. Back out into the cold we go, and a lab is what we find. Searching further, we find another Kimberly monster, and a basement with its lock frozen over. Time to go on the search again. We ride the snowmobile over some ice and land in an observatory. The guy there is clearly not in a great state, and explains that he's been warning humanity about an incoming disaster, a meteor shower that is turning people into plant monsters. It turns out that this guy's son is David, the creep from the plane and the one who was with you after the crash. And David turns out to be a special agent with the FBI, who was flying over to hear about his father's evidence and would then deliver it to the government. Ironic that he himself was stopped by a meteorite. The old man then requests Laura to burn him and his lab. He wants to remove the evidence from the next civilization. All this drama to set up the flamethrower you can use to remove the ice from the basement lock. Down the stairs is some crummy old flowers. We really killed a man for this? Oh wait, here's a picture of David. He's a bit of a hunk. Maybe he isn't too bad. But gas starts to fill the basement. Damn you, David! As you faint, another vision of the old mother, and you're teleported above Yeti's car. You reunite with Kimberly and Jeannie at an old house. The house belongs to a weird piano man who isn't particularly sociable.
Who's there? Who's there? Mother? Is it you? Guess not. Go away! I don't know who you are or what you want, but I have to play this song right!
Instead, you go to see his mother. She explains how it was her who brought them to the remote place to live and locked the son upstairs to play piano all day. Then as revenge, he scarred her face. Not sure what this has to do with the plot, but okay. Next door is a wizard with a silly parrot. He tells how Laura is prophesized to save the world or something. She's basically a holy figure at this point, destined to fight the great destroyer Shadow the Hedgehog. Cool robot hand though. The next part of the game involves walking between these three locations as you watch different cutscenes. When I said before that I enjoyed the combat, I'm really starting to get sick of it. It just feels like an annoyance really, and there's no way to run from each encounter. I really wish I had some repels on hand. Back to the house now, and Kimberly is talking like Tommy Wiseau.
I don't know what's going on here. Unless... What a pretty butterfly.
Piano puzzle now. I've never ever hated these ever before. At least I got a sweet rifle from it. Yeti says he sees a bridge leading to a mountain with a suspicious red glow. This must be where the old man is heading on his quest. Yeti has a plan to use a bomb to blow up the gate and provide access to the mountain. It's worth a shot. You go back to the wizard to explain your plan, but unfortunately he's not in great shape. You rob his key and decide to go through his possessions. The wizard happens to have 2 bombs in his house, which is pretty handy. You decide to tell the mother this. Why? I'm not sure, but the guide I was reading said to do so, so I did. This guy turns up and says he's not sick anymore. Who are you? Also, mate, you really need to get a second opinion from a doctor. Turns out he was lying after all, and as punishment you cut him down with your shiny new rifle. Anyways, Yeti has the bomb ready. Turns out that he's actually a bloomer. It's something he didn't even realize himself. Yeti decides to make a sacrifice and blow himself and the bridge gate up. This breaks Kimberly's mind, who is in love with Yeti now for some reason. Strange, because she does nothing but give him shit the whole game. She blames it on her lack of trust in men or something. Reverse the genders and this would be a very incel relationship. You return to the house again. Not sure how clear I've made this in the video, but the third part of the game is really just a circle between multiple locations. The house where you're currently staying, the mother's house, and the wizard's house. Most of it is pretty unexplained, but you have to visit one of the locations for a 2-minute cutscene, then move to the next location to advance the story. It really feels like padding to add to the end of the game. You fight the mother anyways, and it's another solid fight, like most of the boss fights. Her son, the Mad Piano Man, is dead too for some reason. Not sure if this was because of the mother or Yeti or another one of the Kimberly clones. Anyways, you now have Genie safe and secure and can head towards the mountain. Another Old Man Shadow Quest intermission where we see he has finally entered the evil red zone. Back to Laura's plot, it turns out Yeti is alive and all zombie looking. Kimberly sees him and decides to die for some reason. She literally just runs up and lets herself be stabbed by Yeti. It just seems like a pretty weak ending to her character, which showed some potential before the whole romance plot was the main focus. Laura carries on towards the mountain. It turns out the whole place is a lab, one owned by Laura's mother. Now begins the big exposition dump. Turns out the remains of an angel dating back to the Ice Age was found. Laura's mother wanted to see if it was possible to inseminate herself with the seed of the angel and was successful in birthing a half-angel, this child being Laura. All the premonitions and strength and weird teleporting was because of this lineage. The lab then tried to repeat this experiment. Since no one was willing to give birth to an angel, they were forced to try and clone these new angels. All of this failed. Surrounding you are the corpses of the failed clones. Now this is the part of the plot I don't understand. Are the monsters the failed clones of angels? I thought they were meant to be from the meteorite. Did the aliens from the meteorite infect the bodies, or take over the lab? They must have known some way to clone people since the Kimberly incident. I'm not sure. All I know is Laura's mother wants you to destroy the lab and her AI brain. Are those legs? Is that a... God, are we shooting her... Can I even show this on YouTube? The lab has been destroyed, but Laura still has to face Shadow the Hedgehog. On her final trip up the mountain, she comes face to face with the Old Man, the Destroyer.
Then, O fool, you shall die.
So after his typical evil god speech, you get to blasting. What starts off as a typical boss fight then takes a twist. First your vision is taken away from you, only knowing you hit the enemy through sounds. Your hearing is then removed. The only way you can see what you have hit is through the life bar decreasing. Then your movement is removed. You cannot move. You cannot shoot. You cannot survive. Laura has no chance against this all-seeing god who can just play with her. You hear David's voice, his dying words from when you were together at the plane crash.
Laura, I guess it's time to say goodbye. Oh, Laura, don't be sad. You'll be all right. It's okay. You'll be able to make it through. And look, I have something special to give you. Here it is. I hope you'll think of me every time you look at it. I've put it away in your keepsake. Laura, don't forget me.
And through the power of love, or friendship, or whatever, you get your senses back, and Shadow the Hedgehog is defeated. You are then transported to December 31st, 1999. Laura is in a library and picks up a book. It's written by Kimberly. In the library, she comes across David in a nice, cozy pullover. They embrace as the world enters the new millennium. D2 ends on a happy ending, a pretty easy way for me to forgive what was a questionable plot, but overall the game was a lot of fun. Survival horror mechanics with a nice twist of a first-person shooter made for a unique experience, plus the added inspiration from The Thing would always be a positive. However, I feel the story was mixing too many things. We had the horror aspect of the start, which added drama to make everything more tense and give a purpose to the plot, but during the final third everything started to lean towards romance, putting a lot of the previous plot out of focus for this. During the end credits for the game, a few stats flash up on screen. This shows the state of the human race and where it's currently heading. Kenji Eno clearly wanted to make a statement with this game, adding in a mostly female cast and having a plot focused on drug addiction, abusive relationships, and the state of humanity, and its lack of attempts to revert its negative impact on the world. For that reason, I think Kenji Eno should get a lot of respect, and also because he wrote, directed, and made the score for this game. Now, to kick the elephant out of the room. Unsurprisingly, from the name, D2 is a sequel to a game called D. Originally released in 1995 for the 3DO, D was an early example of a more cinematic game, with less of the focus on gameplay and more on atmosphere and telling a story through FMVs. And these FMVs have aged pretty poorly, though they do carry a crimbly charm. D is mostly a puzzle game. Players explore a castle in first-person view, similar to point-and-click adventure games. You play as Laura Harris, who has to track down her father, who has been committing a mass murder. At the end of the game, it turns out that Laura's father comes from a bloodline of vampires, being an ancestor of Dracula. Laura also shares that ancestry and was guilty of eating her own mother, a memory which her father removed. So the player gets to choose if they stay with their father and let the vampiric urges overtake them, or wipe the bloodline out for good. Though D2 is a sequel, it takes place in a completely different world with different characters. Though the main protagonist of D is also a blonde woman named Laura, she is separate from the sequel Laura. D2 Laura being part angel instead of part vampire. Kenji Eno had this idea for a digital actress, where the characters in his game were all separated but still played by the same person. Think of how some directors like to use the same actor in lots of their movies. But originally D2 was going to be a direct sequel. The game started off with Dracula performing a dark ritual. In the present of 1997, a heavily pregnant Laura is on board a plane. Dracula's ritual then comes into effect, seemingly stealing Laura's baby and summoning it to the past. The plane then explodes. During the game, you would have played as Laura's son, now a teenager, who has to fight whatever hells Dracula has waiting for him. I presume the story would have referenced Laura's connected ancestry with Dracula, perhaps her son being summoned to the past to act as a body for Dracula to take over, prolonging his life. The game was meant for the Panasonic M2, the sequel to Panasonic's other console, the 3DO. The M2 was cancelled. With D2 almost completely finished, but no console to release it on, the game was shelved. Kenji Eno deciding to abandon the project and starting from scratch. I think the old D2 is a pretty fun concept, very goofy with its setup, but the game would have essentially been a 3D Castlevania with a lot of added plot. And the fact that it was finished means it's lost media that does have a fairly decent chance of showing up. The official D2 took a completely different direction, focusing on alien plant beings instead of vampires. It however does carry over themes of lineage from D and the original D2, letting your ancestry define you, or becoming your own person. Overall, I think D2 was a fun game. It was a unique take on survival horror, very ambitious, but unfortunately tried to do and say much more than it was capable of.